The cards hit the table with the finality of a judge's gavel. Augustus Ravencrest stared at the royal flush spread before Bartholomew Thornfield, his jaw tightening as the reality crashed over him like ice water. $300 million. Gone. Well, Bartholomew drawled, his fingers drumming against the mahogany table in the private room of the Manhattan Athletic Club. Seems Lady Luck has abandoned you tonight, old friend. Augustus pushed back from the table, his Armani suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. The other players had long since excused themselves, leaving only him and Bartholomew in the smoke-filled room that now felt more like a tomb. The merger papers are in my office, Augustus said through gritted teeth. You'll have them by morning. Bartholomew's smile was razor-sharp. Actually, I've been thinking. The Ravencrest Holdings merger, that's just business. But you've always been one for theatrical gestures, haven't you? Remember when you bought that yacht just to spite Morrison Industries? The hairs on Augustus's neck stood up. Bartholomew's tone had shifted, becoming something predatory. What are you getting at? Bartholomew leaned back in his chair, pulling out an envelope from his jacket. I have a different proposition. Something that would make this evening truly memorable. I'm not interested in doubling down. I've lost enough. Hear me out. Bartholomew placed the envelope on the table between them. Instead of the merger, you marry someone of my choosing. 1 year of marriage, legally binding. After that, you're free to divorce, and I'll consider our debt settled. Augustus laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're insane. Am I? You've always claimed that marriage is just another business transaction. Here's your chance to prove it. Bartholomew's eyes glittered with malice. Unless you'd prefer bankruptcy. I did some checking on your recent investments. That casino venture in Atlantic City, the real estate developments in Miami, all leveraged against Ravencrest Holdings. Losing this merger means losing everything. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic 20 stories below. Augustus felt the walls closing in. Bartholomew had done his homework. The merger wasn't just a business deal. It was the keystone holding his entire empire together. Who? Augustus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Bartholomew slid the envelope across the table. Octavia Penrose. Lysander Penrose's daughter. The name hit Augustus like a physical blow. Lysander Penrose, the man who'd helped build Ravencrest Holdings from nothing, only to die penniless after some bad investments had destroyed his fortune. Augustus had always felt a twinge of guilt about not helping his father's former partner, but business was business. She's... Augustus struggled for words. I've seen her. She's not exactly your type? No, I imagine not. She's quite large, lives alone, works at the Millbrook Heights Public Library. Never been married. Never even had a boyfriend from what I understand. A virgin, most likely. Augustus's hands clenched into fists. This is sick, even for you. This is justice. Bartholomew's voice turned cold. Lysander Penrose was worth 10 of you, and he died broken and forgotten. His daughter deserves better than her current circumstances. Consider it charity work. The mockery in Bartholomew's tone made Augustus's blood boil, but he was trapped, and they both knew it. He opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a photograph of a woman with soft brown hair pulled back severely, thick-rimmed glasses, and a shapeless cardigan that did nothing to hide her considerable size. She was standing in front of the library, surrounded by stacks of books. She's actually quite intelligent, Bartholomew continued conversationally. Master's degree in literature, speaks 3 languages, has a mind like a steel trap. Of course, intelligence isn't what you typically look for in women, is it? Augustus stared at the photograph. Octavia Penrose looked nothing like the supermodels and socialites he usually dated. She appeared soft, vulnerable, completely out of his league in every way that mattered to him. 1 year, he said finally. 1 year. And Augustus. Bartholomew's smile returned. She doesn't know about our arrangement. As far as she's concerned, you're going to court her properly. I've already laid the groundwork, told her you've been asking about her, that you're ready to settle down with someone substantial. The humiliation was complete. Not only would he have to marry this woman, but he'd have to pretend it was his choice. The great Augustus Ravencrest, reduced to playing house with a librarian. When? 6 weeks. Just enough time for a proper courtship. I've taken the liberty of arranging your first meeting. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, at the library. You're going to need her help with research for a philanthropic project you're starting in honor of your late father. Augustus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need to think about this. There's nothing to think about. You lost, Augustus. For once in your privileged life, you lost something that matters. Bartholomew gathered the cards with practiced efficiency. The car will pick you up tomorrow at 2:30. Don't be late. As Augustus walked toward the door, Bartholomew's voice stopped him cold. Oh, and Augustus? Try to be charming. The poor girl actually believes in fairy tales. The Millbrook Heights Public Library smelled of old paper and forgotten dreams. Augustus adjusted his tie for the third time as he approached the reference desk, where Octavia Penrose sat behind stacks of returned books, her head bent over what appeared to be a catalog system. She looked up as his shadow fell across her desk. Behind her thick glasses, her eyes were a startling shade of green, and for a moment, Augustus forgot his rehearsed introduction. Mr. Ravencrest? Her voice was softer than he'd expected, with a slight tremor that suggested nervousness. Mr. Thornfield said you'd be coming by. Please, call me Augustus. He forced his most charming smile, the one that had closed million-dollar deals and opened countless bedroom doors. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. Not at all. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. You mentioned something about a philanthropic project? Augustus settled into the chair, noting how she seemed to shrink into herself when he got closer. I'm establishing a foundation in my father's memory. Something focused on education and literacy programs. I thought perhaps you could help me research similar organizations, see what's been successful. It wasn't entirely a lie. The Augustus Ravencrest Foundation had been something he'd considered for tax purposes, though he'd never intended to actually follow through with it. That's wonderful. Octavia's face lit up, transforming her features completely. Your father was Maximilian Ravencrest, wasn't he? He worked with my father years ago. The mention of Lysander Penrose sent a stab of guilt through Augustus's chest. Yes, they were partners. I'm sorry about your father's passing. He was a good man. Something flickered across Octavia's face, surprise, perhaps, or suspicion, but it was gone so quickly Augustus wasn't sure he'd seen it at all. Thank you. He spoke of your father often, especially in his final years. She pulled out a notepad. What age groups are you hoping to target with the foundation? For the next hour, Augustus found himself genuinely engaged in the conversation. Octavia's knowledge was impressive, her suggestions practical and well thought out. She spoke passionately about literacy programs, about the children who came to the library after school because they had nowhere else to go, about the elderly patrons who treated the building like a second home. You really love this place, he observed as she walked him through the children's section, pointing out programs that had been successful. It's more than a job, she admitted, running her hand along a shelf of picture books. Books saved me after my father died. When everything else fell apart, this place became my refuge. Augustus studied her profile as she spoke. There was something almost luminous about her when she talked about her work, a passion that made her seem younger, more vibrant. He found himself wondering what other passions might be hidden beneath her reserved exterior. The thought disturbed him. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. Over the following weeks, Augustus found himself returning to the library more often than necessary. Each visit revealed new layers to Octavia Penrose. She was funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard. She was well-read beyond her field, able to discuss everything from classical music to current events with equal intelligence. And she was kind, treating everyone from the library's homeless patrons to the wealthy board members with the same respectful attention. You're different than I expected, she told him one afternoon as they sat in the library's small cafe, surrounded by research materials for the foundation. Different how? The newspapers make you sound like a shark. All business, no heart. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. But you actually listen when people talk. You ask good questions. You seem to genuinely care about this project. Augustus felt heat creep up his neck. Maybe the newspapers don't know everything. Maybe they don't. She looked at him directly then, and Augustus had the unsettling feeling that she could see straight through him. 3 weeks into their courtship, Augustus surprised himself by asking her to dinner. Not for show, not because Bartholomew was watching, but because he genuinely wanted to spend more time with her away from the library's constraints. I don't really have the right clothes for the kind of places you probably go, Octavia said, fidgeting with her cardigan. Then we'll go somewhere you're comfortable. Your choice. She picked a small Italian restaurant in her neighborhood, the kind of place Augustus would normally never consider. But watching Octavia's face light up when the elderly owner greeted her by name, seeing how she interacted with the waitstaff like old friends, Augustus found himself more relaxed than he'd been in years. "Tell me about your father," he said over wine and pasta. Octavia's expression grew wistful. "He was brilliant. An engineer, but he loved literature almost as much as I do. He used to read to me every night when I was little, not just children's books, but real literature. Shakespeare, Dickens, even some Hemingway when I got older." What happened to him? Bad investments. He trusted the wrong people, made some poor decisions. The stress of losing everything. She shrugged, but Augustus could see the pain in her eyes. His heart couldn't take it. He died 6 months after we lost the house. Augustus set down his fork, his appetite gone. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." But her voice was tight. "I just sometimes wonder if things could have been different. If someone had helped him, if he'd had better advice." The guilt was a physical weight in Augustus's chest. His father had abandoned Lysander when things got difficult, had cut ties rather than risk his own fortune. And now here Augustus was, pursuing the man's daughter under false pretenses, continuing the family tradition of using people for personal gain. 2 weeks later, Augustus proposed. He did it properly, with a ring and flowers and a speech about how she'd changed his life. It wasn't entirely untrue. She had changed something in him, made him question things he'd never questioned before. But as he watched her eyes fill with tears of joy, as she whispered yes and threw her arms around his neck, the weight of his deception threatened to crush him. The wedding was small, held in the garden of Bartholomew's estate in Greenwich. Octavia had no family left, few friends outside the library staff. Augustus's side was filled with business associates and social acquaintances, people who made polite conversation while clearly wondering what he was doing marrying the librarian. "You may kiss the bride," the minister announced. As Augustus lifted Octavia's veil, he saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, her expression was calculating, almost predatory. But then she smiled, and he told himself he'd imagined it. The kiss was soft, tentative, and Augustus felt something shift inside his chest, something that had nothing to do with the arrangement he'd made with Bartholomew. As they walked back down the aisle, Octavia's hand in his, Augustus caught sight of Bartholomew in the crowd. The man was smiling, but there was something triumphant in his expression, something that suggested this was only the beginning. The limousine ride to the Ravencrest estate was quiet. Octavia sat beside him, her wedding dress carefully arranged, her hands folded in her lap. She seemed nervous, which was natural for a virgin bride, Augustus supposed. But there was something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Are you all right?" he asked as they pulled through the gates of his Greenwich property. "Just thinking," she replied, not looking at him, "about how different my life is going to be now." The mansion loomed before them, all glass and steel and modern angles. Augustus had always been proud of the house, but seeing it through Octavia's eyes, he suddenly wondered if it looked cold, unwelcoming. "It's beautiful," she said, but her voice was oddly flat. "Very different from the house where I grew up." "Which house was that?" She turned to look at him then, and again he caught that flicker of something dangerous in her green eyes. "The one your family helped my father lose." The master bedroom felt like a mausoleum as Augustus loosened his tie, watching Octavia move around the space with surprising familiarity. She'd changed from her wedding dress into a simple white nightgown that somehow made her look both innocent and formidable. "You know this house," he said, not bothering to make it sound like a question. Octavia paused at the window, her fingers tracing the frame. "I was here once. A long time ago, when your father and mine were still partners. I was maybe 10 years old." She turned to face him. "Your father had just installed these windows. Custom Italian glass," he said. "Cost more than most people's cars." Augustus felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "Octavia, what exactly do you know about our father's partnership?" She moved to the armchair by the fireplace, settling into it like she belonged there. The transformation was startling. Gone was the shy librarian, replaced by someone who seemed perfectly at ease in his world. "I know that Lysander Penrose didn't make bad investments, Augustus. I know he was systematically destroyed by people he trusted." Her voice was calm, matter of fact. "I also know that you didn't fall in love with me, and Bartholomew Thornfield didn't arrange our marriage out of kindness." Augustus's mouth went dry. I don't know what you're talking about. The poker game. $300 million. The choice between bankruptcy and marrying the fat librarian. Octavia smiled, but it wasn't the gentle smile he'd grown accustomed to. Did you really think Bartholomew would keep something like that secret? He's been planning this for years. The room spun slightly around Augustus. How do you? How do I know? Because I've been investigating our families for the past 8 years. Ever since my father died, clutching a letter that named Maximilian Ravencrest as one of the men who betrayed him. She reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. Would you like to see what I found? Augustus stared at the folder like it was a loaded gun. You've been planning this. Planning what? To marry you? No, that was Bartholomew's idea. But when he approached me 6 months ago with his little proposal, I saw an opportunity. She opened the folder and spread photographs across the coffee table. These are copies of bank records, Augustus. Transfers from Ravencrest Holdings to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. All dated just before my father's company collapsed. The photographs showed financial documents that made Augustus's blood turn to ice. His father's signature was clearly visible on transfer orders, moving millions of dollars out of joint ventures just before they failed. He stole from your father. Stole, embezzled, manipulated. Call it whatever makes you feel better. The result was the same. Lysander Penrose lost everything while Maximilian Ravencrest got rich. Octavia's voice remained steady, but Augustus could see the rage burning behind her eyes. My father died believing he was a failure, that he destroyed his family through incompetence. He never knew he'd been robbed. Augustus sank into the chair across from her, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. Why are you showing me this now? Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to the FBI with everything I have. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to handle this privately. What do you want? Justice, restitution, an admission of guilt. Octavia leaned forward. Your father stole $47 million from my family, Augustus. I want it back, with interest. The number hit him like a physical blow. $47 million was more than he could liquidate without destroying half his holdings. I don't have that kind of cash. Then you'll find it. Sell the yacht. Liquidate the art collection. Mortgage this house if you have to. Her eyes glittered with determination. I've spent 8 years watching you live in luxury built on my father's stolen money. That ends now. Augustus stared at this woman who'd somehow transformed from a meek librarian into an avenging angel in the space of minutes. You planned all of this. The courtship, the marriage. I planned to expose your family's crimes. The marriage was Bartholomew's addition to the plan. She gathered the photographs back into the folder. Though I have to admit, it provides a certain poetic justice. The daughter of the man you destroyed, now legally entitled to half of everything you own. Half of everything I own was legitimately earned. Was it? Octavia pulled out another set of documents. Because I also found records of the Riverside Development Project in Miami. The one where Ravencrest Holdings purchased land through shell companies, then used inside information from city planning meetings to buy up surrounding properties before the highway expansion was announced. Augustus felt the walls closing in around him. The Riverside project had been one of his biggest successes, the deal that had established him as a major player in real estate development. If she could prove insider trading, you don't understand how business works. I understand exactly how your business works. I've been studying it for years. Octavia stood and walked to the window again. Do you know what the worst part is, Augustus? I actually started to like you during our courtship. You seem different from what I expected. Kinder. More genuine. The admission hit him harder than any of her accusations. I wasn't pretending to care about the foundation work. Weren't you? She looked at him over her shoulder. Everything about our relationship has been built on lies. You married me to avoid bankruptcy. I married you to get close enough to destroy you. At least I'm being honest about it now. Augustus stood abruptly, anger finally overtaking shock. So what happens now? You ruin me and ride off into the sunset with your revenge. That depends on you. Octavia turned to face him fully. You have a choice, Augustus. We can handle this privately. You make restitution, we restructure your business practices, and nobody else has to know what your father did. Or I can turn everything over to the authorities and let them sort it out. And our marriage? Something flickered across her face. Regret, maybe, or disappointment. Our marriage was never real. We both know that. But even as she said it, Augustus remembered the moments during their courtship when he'd forgotten about Bartholomew's ultimatum, when he'd genuinely enjoyed her company. The way she'd looked at him when he'd asked about her dreams, the softness in her voice when she'd talked about the children at the library. It felt real sometimes, he said quietly. Octavia's composure cracked slightly. Sometimes it did. But feelings don't change facts, Augustus. Your family destroyed mine. That's not something I can just forgive because you buy me dinner and listen to me talk about books. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their mutual deception settling between them like a third presence in the room. I need time to think, Augustus said finally. You have until morning. I've already scheduled a meeting with Federal Agent Sarah Coleman for 10 a.m. Octavia moved toward the bathroom door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it had to be this way. In another life, under different circumstances. She didn't finish the sentence, but Augustus heard what she wasn't saying. In another life, they might have been happy together. As the bathroom door closed behind her, Augustus collapsed back into his chair, staring at the folder of evidence that could destroy everything he'd built. Outside the Italian glass windows, his carefully manicured grounds stretched into darkness, and for the first time in his life, Augustus Ravencrest felt truly afraid. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd married Octavia to save his empire, only to discover that she held the power to destroy it completely. Bartholomew had played them both, but somehow Augustus suspected that Octavia's game was far from over. Augustus didn't sleep. He spent the night in his study, nursing whiskey and staring at financial statements, trying to calculate how much of his empire he could liquidate without triggering a complete collapse. Every number led to the same conclusion. Octavia held him completely at her mercy. At 6 a.m., he found her in the kitchen, fully dressed in a charcoal gray suit that somehow made her look both professional and dangerous. She was drinking coffee and reading the Wall Street Journal like she owned the place. Good morning, she said without looking up. I made coffee. Cancel the FBI meeting. Octavia folded the newspaper and set it aside. I'm listening. I'll pay the $47 million. But I need time to liquidate assets without destroying the company. 6 months. 3 months. And I want full access to Ravencrest Holdings' financial records. I need to verify there are no other victims. Augustus poured himself coffee, his hands steadier than he felt. You don't trust me? Would you trust me, in my position? He had to admit she had a point. Fine. 3 months, full transparency. But I have conditions. Octavia raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to make demands. I am if you want to avoid a public scandal that destroys both our reputations. Augustus sat across from her, studying her face. You've been very thorough in your investigation, but you missed something. What? Bartholomew Thornfield. You think he orchestrated our marriage just to help you get revenge? Nothing Bartholomew does is that simple. Augustus pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. This was taken 3 days ago outside your apartment. The image showed Bartholomew talking to a man Augustus didn't recognize, but Octavia's face went pale when she saw it. Who was that? Augustus asked. Vincent Morrison. He was my father's business partner before your father. Her voice was tight. He disappeared after my father's company collapsed. I always assumed he'd fled to avoid the creditors. Disappeared, or was relocated. Because according to my security team, Morrison has been living under an assumed name in Switzerland for the past 8 years, and Bartholomew has been sending him monthly payments. Octavia stared at the photograph, her composure finally cracking. That's impossible. Is it? Think about it, Octavia. How did you really find all those financial records? Bank documents that should have been destroyed years ago, offshore account information that should have been impossible to trace. Augustus leaned forward. Someone wanted you to find that evidence. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Augustus could see her mind working, reassessing everything she thought she knew. Bartholomew gave me some of the initial leads, she admitted slowly. He said he'd been investigating your family for years, that he wanted to help me get justice. Bartholomew doesn't care about justice. He cares about power. Augustus pulled out another document. I spent the night going through my father's old files. Bartholomew wasn't just aware of what happened to your father. He helped orchestrate it. The papers showed correspondence between Bartholomew and Maximilian Ravencrest, discussing the deliberate manipulation of Lysander Penrose's investments. Your father wasn't just robbed, Octavia. He was set up. Bartholomew fed him false information, convinced him to make investments that were designed to fail. Augustus watched the color drain from her face. My father provided the capital and the connections, but it was Bartholomew's plan from the beginning. Octavia stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Why? What did Bartholomew have against my father? Money. Power. The usual reasons. Augustus joined her at the window. Your father had patents for several engineering processes that Bartholomew wanted. When Lysander refused to sell, Bartholomew decided to take them another way. The patents. Octavia's voice was barely a whisper. Bartholomew's company has been using my father's designs for years. I always wondered how he developed those technologies so quickly. He stole them, just like he stole everything else. And now he's using you to finish the job. Augustus turned her to face him. Think about it. He arranges our marriage, knowing you'll demand financial restitution. He probably expects you to take me for everything I'm worth, leaving Ravencrest Holdings vulnerable to a hostile takeover. You're saying I'm being manipulated. We both are. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Octavia pulled away from him, her walls going back up. How do I know this isn't just another lie? How do I know you didn't fake these documents to manipulate me? Augustus had expected the question. Because you're going to verify everything independently. I'll give you access to my father's original files, his personal correspondence, his private safe deposit box. You can bring in your own forensic accountants, your own investigators. And in exchange, we worked together to bring down Bartholomew. He destroyed your family and used mine to do it. He's played us against each other for years while he built his empire on stolen innovations and blood money. Octavia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. You realize this means trusting each other. Do we have a choice? She moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that she hadn't worn during their courtship. I've been lying to you since the day we met, Augustus. I'm not the innocent librarian you thought you married. I've noticed. He reached up to touch her face, surprised when she didn't pull away. You're nothing like what I expected. What did you expect? Someone I could pity. Someone grateful for my attention. His thumb traced her jawline. Instead, I got someone who could destroy me without breaking a sweat. Are you afraid of me? Terrified, he admitted, but also fascinated. You've been playing a game I didn't even know existed. Something shifted in Octavia's expression, the last of her masks falling away. You want to know the truth? I didn't plan to feel anything for you. You were supposed to be just another entitled rich man, easy to manipulate and easier to hate. But you listened when I talked about books. You cared about the foundation work. You treated the library staff like human beings instead of servants. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. You made me remember what it felt like to hope for something besides revenge. The air between them crackled with tension. Augustus found himself leaning closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her eyes. This is a mistake, Octavia said, but she didn't move away. Probably. We don't trust each other. No. We're using each other to get revenge on a mutual enemy. Yes. And I could still destroy you if I wanted to. You could. Augustus's lips were inches from hers now. But you won't. How can you be sure? Because you're not ruthless enough. If you were, you would have gone to the FBI last night instead of giving me a choice. Octavia's breath caught. Maybe I'm just a better strategist than you think. Maybe you are. He closed the distance between them. But right now, I don't care. The kiss was nothing like their wedding kiss. This was fire and desperation, months of pretense and manipulation boiling over into something raw and honest. Octavia kissed him back with a hunger that surprised them both, her hands fisting in his shirt as if she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. This changes nothing, Octavia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Everything, Augustus corrected. This changes everything. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped back. The FBI meeting is at 10. I'll cancel it, but only because I want to verify your information first. If you're lying to me. I'm not. Then we have work to do. She straightened her jacket, the professional mask sliding back into place. And Augustus? Don't mistake one kiss for forgiveness. You still owe me $47 million. As she walked away, Augustus couldn't help but smile. Octavia Penrose was going to be the death of him, but what a way to go. 3 weeks of working together had transformed the Ravencrest mansion into a war room. Augustus's study was covered with financial documents, photographs, and timeline charts mapping out 30 years of Bartholomew's manipulations. The investigation had revealed a pattern of systematic destruction that went far beyond Lysander Penrose. "Look at this," Octavia said, spreading new documents across the desk. She'd shed her conservative cardigans for fitted blazers that accentuated curves Augustus was beginning to realize had been carefully hidden. The Meridian Corporation collapse in 2018. Bartholomew was their primary investor right before they went under. Augustus studied the papers, noting the familiar signatures and transfer patterns. Same methodology as my father's deal with Lysander. Promise partnership, provide initial capital, then systematically drain resources while feeding false market information. 12 families destroyed over 20 years. All successful engineers, inventors, or small business owners with valuable intellectual property. Octavia's voice was tight with controlled anger. He's been building his empire on other people's innovations. And now he's coming for mine. Augustus looked up from the documents. The poker game wasn't about humiliating me. It was about positioning himself for a takeover. They'd been dancing around each other for weeks, the tension from their first kiss simmering beneath every interaction. Augustus found himself watching the way Octavia's lips moved when she read, the graceful way her hands sorted through evidence. She caught him staring more than once, her green eyes holding his gaze just long enough to make his pulse quicken. "We need to discuss your finances," Octavia said, pulling out a laptop. "I've been analyzing your holdings, and there's something that doesn't make sense." Augustus moved to look over her shoulder, close enough to smell her perfume. "What kind of something?" "Your liquidity position is much stronger than you initially claimed. You could have paid the $47 million without liquidating major assets." She turned to face him, their faces inches apart. "Why did you lie?" The accusation hung between them. Augustus could feel her breath on his lips, see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "Because I wanted more time with you." The honesty surprised them both. Octavia's expression softened for a moment before she caught herself. "That's not a good enough reason, isn't it?" Augustus reached up to touch her face. 3 weeks ago, you were planning to destroy me. Now you're helping me track down evidence to destroy Bartholomew. What changed?" "The evidence changed. When I realized Bartholomew was." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Octavia stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "This is a mistake. We're partners in this investigation, nothing more." "Are we?" Augustus followed her to the window. "Because the way you look at me suggests otherwise. The way I look at you is irrelevant. When this is over, when Bartholomew is finished, we'll get divorced and go our separate ways." "Will we?" "Yes." But her voice lacked conviction. Augustus stepped closer, backing her against the window. "What if I don't want to get divorced? What you want doesn't matter. This marriage was never real. It's real now." Before she could protest, his phone rang. The caller ID made his blood run cold. "Bartholomew." "Answer it," Octavia whispered. "Act normal." Augustus put the phone on speaker. "Hello, Bartholomew." "Augustus, how's married life treating you?" Bartholomew's voice was jovial, but there was an edge beneath it. "I hope you're making your lovely wife feel welcome." Octavia's adjusting well to her new circumstances. "Excellent. I was hoping we could all have dinner tomorrow night. I'm eager to hear how the foundation work is progressing." Augustus met Octavia's eyes. She nodded slightly. "Of course. 8 o'clock. Perfect. Oh, and Augustus, bring the Meridian files. I have some questions about your father's involvement in that particular venture." The line went dead. Augustus stared at the phone, his mind racing. "He knows," Octavia said quietly. "How is that possible? We've been careful." "Not careful enough, apparently." She moved to the desk, rapidly organizing their evidence. "He mentioned Meridian specifically. Either he's been watching us, or what? Or someone's been feeding him information." Octavia's face had gone pale. "Augustus, who else has access to this house? Staff, security, maintenance workers?" "Just the usual people. Maria comes in twice a week for cleaning, James handles the grounds, and..." Augustus stopped. "And I had the security system updated last week." "Updated by whom?" "Thornfield Security Solutions. Bartholomew recommended them after we got married. Said I needed better protection now that I had a wife to worry about." The implications hit them both simultaneously. Their entire investigation had been monitored from the beginning. "We have to get out of here," Octavia said, already moving toward the door. "Where can we go?" If he's been watching us, he knows our every move. Not every move. Octavia paused at the doorway. There's a place. A cabin in Vermont that belonged to my aunt. It's off the grid, no electronics, no paper trail connecting it to either of us. How do we get there without being followed? Leave that to me. Pack light and meet me in the garage in 30 minutes. As Augustus threw essentials into a bag, his mind raced through the implications of Bartholomew's surveillance. How long had they been watched? How much did Bartholomew know about their growing attraction to each other? In the garage, Octavia was waiting beside a motorcycle he'd never seen before. Where did this come from? I bought it 3 weeks ago under an assumed name. Paid cash. She handed him a helmet. Hold on tight. The ride through the Connecticut countryside was terrifying and exhilarating. Octavia handled the bike with expert skill, taking back roads and shortcuts that suggested she'd planned this escape route carefully. Augustus found himself pressed against her back, acutely aware of her warmth, her strength, the way she moved with the machine. The cabin was exactly what she'd promised, a small, rustic structure surrounded by dense woods, with no visible power lines or modern conveniences. Inside, oil lamps provided light, and a wood-burning stove offered heat. How long can we stay here? Augustus asked as Octavia lit the lamps. As long as necessary. I've been stockpiling supplies for months. You've been planning this. I've been planning for every contingency. She turned to face him, the lamplight casting shadows across her features, including the possibility that I might need to disappear completely. And me? Was I part of your contingency planning? No. Her voice was soft. You were a complication I didn't anticipate. The admission hung between them in the flickering light. Without the distractions of the outside world, without the pretense of their investigation, they were just two people who'd found themselves caught in something larger than either had planned. Octavia, Augustus began, but she moved closer, silencing him with a look. Don't say whatever you're thinking of saying. Her hands came up to rest on his chest. Because once you say it, we can't take it back. Maybe I don't want to take it back. You don't know what you want. Neither do I. But even as she spoke, her hands were moving higher, tracing the line of his shoulders. All I know is that when I thought Bartholomew might hurt you, when I realized you were in danger because of me. What? I realized I care about you more than I care about revenge. The confession seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. Augustus cupped her face in his hands, studying her expression in the lamplight. Are you sure? Instead of answering with words, Octavia rose on her toes and kissed him. This kiss was different from their first, slower, deeper, full of the recognition that they were crossing a line they couldn't uncross. Augustus's hands found the zipper of her jacket, sliding it down slowly while she worked at the buttons of his shirt. There was no urgency, no desperation, just the steady acknowledgement that whatever this was between them, it was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Octavia rested her forehead against his. This changes everything, she whispered. I know. We still don't trust each other completely. No. And we still have to stop Bartholomew. Yes. But right now, none of that matters. Augustus swept her up in his arms, carrying her toward the cabin's single bedroom. Right now, the rest of the world can go to hell. As he laid her gently on the bed, Augustus realized that somewhere between revenge and investigation, between manipulation and partnership, he'd fallen completely and irreversibly in love with his wife. Augustus woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through windows he'd forgotten existed without electronic blinds. Octavia stood at the small stove, wearing one of his shirts and nothing else, her hair falling in waves down her back. Good morning, she said without turning around, but he could hear the smile in her voice. Very good morning. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. Sleep well. Better than I have in years. She leaned back against him. No nightmares about my father, no anxiety about the investigation. Just peace. Augustus tightened his hold on her, struck by how perfectly she fit against him. Last night had been a revelation, not just the physical intimacy, but the emotional barriers that had finally crumbled between them. For the first time since their marriage, they'd been completely honest with each other. We can't stay here forever, Octavia said softly, as if reading his thoughts. Why not? Because Bartholomew isn't going to just disappear. And because there are still 12 families who deserve justice for what he did to them. Augustus turned her in his arms, studying her face in the morning light. Without makeup or careful styling, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also somehow stronger. What if we just ran, took what money we could access, and disappeared somewhere he'd never find us? Could you do that? Could you really abandon everything you've built? Augustus considered the question seriously. A week ago, the answer would have been an immediate no. His empire, his reputation, his standing in New York society, those things had defined him. But looking at Octavia now, seeing the way she transformed from the timid librarian into this passionate, brilliant woman, he realized his priorities had shifted completely. Yes, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. For you, I could. Something flickered across Octavia's expression, surprise, pleasure, and something else he couldn't quite identify. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, she admitted. But it's also the most selfish. Selfish, because it's not just about us anymore. She moved away from him, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Bartholomew killed my father, Augustus. Maybe not directly, but the stress of losing everything, the shame of believing he'd failed, that's what stopped his heart. Augustus accepted the coffee, watching her face carefully. And you need to make him pay for that. I need him to face consequences for what he's done. Not just to my family, but to all of them. She pulled out a notebook he hadn't seen before. While you were sleeping, I made a list of everyone we know he's destroyed. 12 families, Augustus. 12 families whose lives were shattered so he could build his empire. Augustus looked at the list, names, dates, amounts stolen. The scope of Bartholomew's crimes was staggering. How do we prove all of this without the evidence we left at the house? We don't need the originals. I've been photographing everything and storing it in encrypted cloud accounts under various identities. Octavia smiled at his expression. You're not the only one who knows how to plan for contingencies. You've been preparing for this possibility for years. I've been preparing for the possibility that I'd need to disappear, yes. What I wasn't prepared for was caring about what happened to you. The admission hit him harder than it should have. And now I'm terrified that he'll hurt you to get to me. She sat across from him at the small table. Augustus, there's something else you need to know. Something I discovered last week, but didn't know how to tell you. The serious tone made his stomach clench. What? Bartholomew didn't just orchestrate our marriage to position himself for a takeover. He needed legal access to something specific. She pulled out a photograph from her notebook. Do you recognize this? The image showed a birth certificate. Augustus squinted at the faded text, then felt the blood drain from his face. Bartholomew Thornfield, born October 15, 1975. Father, Maximilian Ravencrest. He's your half-brother, Octavia said quietly. Your father had an affair with Bartholomew's mother, Eleanor Thornfield, in the mid-70s. When she got pregnant, your father paid her to keep quiet and stay away. Augustus stared at the birth certificate, his mind reeling. That's impossible. My father would have told me. Would he? From what I can tell, Maximilian spent most of his life hiding his mistakes. Octavia reached across the table to touch his hand. Bartholomew grew up knowing exactly who his father was, watching from a distance as you inherited everything that should have been partly his. So this is about inheritance. It's about recognition. Power. Everything he felt he was denied. She pulled out more documents. When your father died 5 years ago, Bartholomew contested the will. He was quietly denied any claim to the Ravencrest fortune, but the legal proceedings gave him access to family financial records, which is how he learned about the Penrose deal, and decided to use me to get his revenge. Octavia's voice was steady, but Augustus could see the pain in her eyes. He's been planning this for years, Augustus. Every move, every manipulation, it's all been leading to this moment. What moment? The moment when he destroys everything your father built and claims it as his birthright. She stood and moved to the window. The dinner invitation wasn't random. He's ready to make his final move. Augustus joined her at the window, looking out at the peaceful forest that surrounded their temporary sanctuary. What does he want from us now? Proof that we've been working together. Evidence that you're willing to betray the Ravencrest legacy by allying with the daughter of one of your father's victims. Octavia leaned against him. Once he has that, he can position himself as the rightful heir cleaning up the family's crimes. And if we don't show up, he'll come looking for us. And when he finds us, She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Augustus wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the magnitude of their situation sank in. They weren't just fighting for their relationship or even for justice. They were fighting for their lives. "There has to be another way," he said finally. "There is." Octavia turned in his arms, her expression determined. "We go back. We walk into his trap, but we spring one of our own." "What kind of trap?" "The kind that uses his own arrogance against him." She smiled, but it was sharp-edged and dangerous. "Bartholomew thinks he knows everything about us, but he's made one crucial miscalculation, which is, he thinks you're still the same selfish, entitled man who lost that poker game. He doesn't realize you've changed." She cupped his face in her hands. "He doesn't know that you'd burn down your entire empire before you'd let him hurt me." Augustus felt something shift inside his chest, a certainty that went beyond fear or desire. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to trust me completely." "Can you do that?" Looking into her green eyes, seeing the intelligence and determination there, Augustus realized that trust was no longer a question. Somewhere between their first meeting at the library and this moment in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Octavia Penrose had become the most important thing in his world. "Yes," he said simply. "Then tomorrow night, we're going to end this." She kissed him softly. "But first, we have today. Just us, no surveillance, no schemes, no one watching." "What do you want to do with today?" Octavia's smile was pure mischief. "I want to make love to my husband in broad daylight. I want to swim naked in that lake we passed on the way here. I want to pretend, just for one day, that we're a normal couple who found each other because we wanted to, not because we were forced together by circumstance. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we go to war." As Augustus carried her back to the bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of birds filling the air, he realized that whatever happened next, he'd never regret these stolen hours with the woman who'd turned his world upside down and somehow made it better in the process. The Thornfield estate loomed against the evening sky like something from a Gothic novel, all dark stone and sharp angles. Augustus adjusted his tie as their rental car approached the circular drive, acutely aware of the small recording device Octavia had sewn into his jacket lining. "Remember," Octavia said quietly, "let him think he's winning. Arrogance will make him careless." Augustus squeezed her hand. "Are you sure about this?" "As sure as I can be about walking into the lion's den." She checked her watch. The FBI should be in position by now. During their drive back from Vermont, Octavia had made a series of carefully worded phone calls. Agent Sarah Coleman, it turned out, had been investigating Bartholomew's business practices for months but lacked sufficient evidence for prosecution. The promise of recorded confessions and documented proof had been enough to secure federal cooperation. "Mr. and Mrs. Ravencrest," Bartholomew's butler announced as they entered the opulent dining room. "Mr. Thornfield is waiting for you in the study." They found Bartholomew behind an enormous desk, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The room was designed to intimidate: leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and enough mahogany to furnish a small mansion. "Augustus, Octavia, so good to see you both." Bartholomew rose and gestured to chairs across from his desk. "I trust you enjoyed your little vacation in Vermont." Augustus felt Octavia tense beside him, but her expression remained neutral. "Vermont? Oh, come now. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you disappeared for 3 days? I've been keeping an eye on you both, for your own protection, of course." "Of course," Augustus replied smoothly. "We needed some time to process everything that's been happening." "Everything?" Bartholomew's smile sharpened. "And what exactly has been happening?" Octavia leaned forward slightly. "We've been discussing our future. Our marriage started under unusual circumstances, but we've discovered we have more in common than we initially thought." "How touching." Bartholomew moved to the window, his back to them. "And what, pray tell, do you have in common?" "A shared interest in justice," Augustus said carefully. "Justice?" Bartholomew turned around, and his mask had finally slipped. The genial host was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "An interesting word choice, considering your family's history with justice." "What do you mean?" "Drop the act, Augustus. I know you've been investigating me. I know what you think you've discovered about Lysander Penrose, about the Meridian Corporation, about all the rest." Bartholomew moved back to his desk, pulling out a thick file. The question is, what do you plan to do about it? Augustus met Octavia's eyes briefly, then made his choice. We plan to expose everything. Every family you've destroyed, every patent you've stolen, every life you've ruined. Bartholomew laughed, but it was an ugly sound. Really? And how exactly do you plan to do that? With stolen documents? Circumstantial evidence? Corporate records that could be interpreted a dozen different ways. With this, Octavia stood and pulled out her phone, playing a recording of Bartholomew's voice from their previous meeting. His words were clear and damning. His admission of orchestrating Lysander's downfall, his boasts about manipulating the market, his detailed knowledge of illegal financial transfers. For a moment, Bartholomew's composure cracked entirely. Where did you get that? You're not the only one who knows how to plant surveillance equipment, Octavia said calmly. I've been recording our conversations for months. That recording was made without my consent. It's inadmissible. In a criminal trial, perhaps. But in the court of public opinion? In the business world where reputation is everything. Augustus stood as well. I think you'll find it quite persuasive. Bartholomew's face had gone pale, but he quickly regained control. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Do you think this is just about money? About business deals gone wrong? We know about the birth certificate, Octavia said quietly. The words hit Bartholomew like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 50 years. We know you're Augustus's half-brother. We know Maximilian Ravencrest was your father. We know why you've spent 30 years building toward this moment. Bartholomew was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with decades of accumulated rage. Do you have any idea what it was like? Watching from the outside while Augustus got everything? The name, the inheritance, the respect, the love of a father who wouldn't even acknowledge my existence. So you decided to destroy innocent families to get revenge? Augustus's voice was tight with controlled anger. Lysander Penrose never did anything to you. Lysander Penrose was collateral damage. They all were. Bartholomew stood abruptly, moving to a cabinet and pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. I needed capital, connections, patents, technology, everything required to build an empire that would rival what should have been mine by birthright. And when Augustus wouldn't willingly give you what you thought you deserved, you decided to take it by force, Octavia added. The poker game was brilliant, you have to admit. Augustus loses everything, marries you out of desperation, and in his gratitude for your mercy, he brings me into the family business. Eventually, I'd have controlling interest in Ravencrest Holdings. Except you underestimated us both, Augustus said. Yes, well, I didn't anticipate that you'd actually fall in love with each other. That complicates things considerably. Bartholomew drained his glass and set it down hard, but not insurmountably. The casual way he said it sent ice through Augustus's veins. What do you mean? I mean that tragic accidents happen all the time. Young couples, overcome by passion, driving too fast on winding mountain roads. Very sad. Very final. Augustus stepped protectively in front of Octavia. You're threatening us. I'm offering you a choice. Sign over controlling interest in Ravencrest Holdings, and you can live quietly somewhere far away. Refuse, and Bartholomew shrugged. And what? You'll have us killed, if necessary. Bartholomew's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. I've waited 30 years for this, Augustus. I'm not going to let sentimentality stop me now. There's just one problem with your plan, Octavia said, her voice steady despite the threat, which is, you're under arrest. The voice came from behind them as Agent Sarah Coleman stepped into the room, followed by 3 other FBI agents. Bartholomew Thornfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and making terroristic threats. Bartholomew's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and finally, grudging admiration. You recorded this entire conversation. Every word, Augustus confirmed, touching the device in his jacket, including your confession to 30 years of financial crimes and your threats against our lives. As the agents moved to handcuff Bartholomew, he looked directly at Augustus. You think this is over? You think arresting me will undo everything that's been done? No, Augustus replied. But it's a start. The families you destroyed deserve justice, Octavia added. And now they're going to get it. Bartholomew laughed bitterly as the handcuffs clicked into place. Justice? You want to talk about justice? Ask Augustus about the Riverside Development Project. Ask him about the families displaced when he bought their neighborhood for pennies on the dollar. Ask him about the children who had to change schools because their parents couldn't afford the new rent prices. Augustus felt Octavia's eyes on him, but kept his gaze fixed on Bartholomew. That was legal. Legal and moral aren't the same thing, brother. You may have won tonight, but you're not the hero in this story. Neither of us is. As the FBI agents led Bartholomew away, his words echoed in the sudden silence of the study. Augustus turned to find Octavia watching him with an unreadable expression. Is it true? She asked quietly. About Riverside? Augustus closed his eyes briefly. Yes, but Octavia, we'll deal with it later. She moved to his side, taking his hand. Right now, let's just focus on the fact that we survived. Through the window, they watched the FBI cars disappear into the night, carrying Bartholomew toward a justice that was 30 years overdue. But Augustus couldn't shake the feeling that his half-brother's final words were a promise rather than a threat, that this victory was only the beginning of a much longer reckoning. 6 months after Bartholomew's arrest, Augustus stood in the garden of the Millbrook Heights Public Library, watching Octavia cut the ribbon on the new children's wing. The morning sun caught the golden highlights in her hair, and the soft curve of her growing belly was barely visible beneath her flowing dress. The Lysander Penrose Children's Learning Center is now officially open, she announced to the gathered crowd. The applause was warm and genuine, a mixture of library patrons, local officials, and families whose lives had been touched by the programs Octavia had developed. Augustus smiled as he watched her interact with the children who'd gathered for the ceremony. She knelt carefully to their eye level, her natural warmth drawing them in like moths to a flame. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, not the calculated investigator who'd married him for revenge, but the passionate educator who believed books could save the world. Mr. Ravencrest? A reporter approached with a microphone. Can you tell us about the Penrose Ravencrest Foundation's plans for expansion? The foundation will be opening similar learning centers in 12 cities over the next 2 years, Augustus replied, his prepared remarks flowing smoothly. Each location will serve communities that have been underserved by traditional educational resources. What he didn't mention was that each of those 12 cities corresponded to families that Bartholomew had destroyed. The foundation wasn't just about education, it was about restitution, about using the Ravencrest fortune to repair some of the damage done over 3 decades of systematic exploitation. After the ceremony, Augustus found Octavia sitting on a bench in the library's memorial garden, a space they'd created to honor her father and the other victims of Bartholomew's schemes. Tired? He asked, settling beside her. Happy tired, she said, leaning against his shoulder. Did you see Mrs. Chen's face when her grandson read that entire book by himself? 3 months ago, he wouldn't even try to sound out simple words. You're changing lives. We're changing lives. She looked up at him. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Augustus thought about the past 6 months, about the difficult conversations they'd had after Bartholomew's arrest. The investigation into his half-brother's crimes had inevitably led to scrutiny of Ravencrest Holdings practices. Augustus had made the painful decision to voluntarily surrender properties acquired through questionable means, to compensate families displaced by his developments, and to restructure his entire business model around ethical practices. It had cost him nearly half his fortune, but he'd never felt richer. Any word from Agent Coleman? Octavia asked. Bartholomew's trial starts next month. His lawyers are pushing for a plea deal, but Coleman thinks they have enough evidence for multiple convictions. And Vincent Morrison? Extradited from Switzerland last week. Turns out he's been very cooperative once he realized Bartholomew had been planning to eliminate him as a loose end. Octavia was quiet for a moment, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Do you think it's really over? The legal proceedings? No, that'll take years. But Bartholomew's empire is finished. His stolen patents have been returned to their rightful owners, and the families he destroyed are finally getting justice. Augustus covered her hand with his. As for us, I think we're just beginning. They'd renewed their vows 3 months earlier, in a small ceremony at the cabin in Vermont where they'd first made love. This time, there were no hidden agendas, no ulterior motives, just 2 people who'd found something real in the midst of deception and manipulation. I have something for you, Octavia said, pulling an envelope from her purse. Consider it a 6-month anniversary gift. Augustus opened the envelope and found a bank statement showing a $47 million transfer into an account bearing his name. Octavia, what is this? The money you owe me. Well, technically the money your father owed my father. Her smile was soft. I'm giving it back. I don't understand. The night I showed you those documents, I told you I wanted justice and restitution. I got both. She gestured toward the library, the learning center, the memorial garden. This is worth more than any amount of money could ever be. Augustus stared at the statement, overwhelmed by the gesture. You could have kept it. You had every right to that money. I had every right to revenge, too. But somewhere along the way, I learned that love is more powerful than hate. She leaned over to kiss his cheek. Besides, I have everything I need right here. Even married to a man who spent years displacing families for profit? It was a conversation they'd had many times, Augustus's guilt over his past practices warring with Octavia's belief in his capacity for change. Especially married to a man who spent the last 6 months trying to undo that damage, she corrected. You can't change the past, Augustus, but you can choose how to live going forward. And if our child asks about their grandfather someday, about the things the Ravencrest family did, then we'll tell them the truth. We'll tell them that good people sometimes make terrible choices, but that those choices don't have to define their legacy. Octavia's hand moved to her belly again. We'll tell them that their father chose love over pride, justice over profit, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is admit when you're wrong and work to make it right. Augustus pulled her closer, marveling at how this woman had transformed not just his life, but his entire understanding of what life could be. I love you, Mrs. Ravencrest. I love you too, Mr. Ravencrest. Even if you did marry me under false pretenses, says the woman who married me planning to destroy my life, and instead destroyed my careful plans for a quiet, solitary existence. Octavia's laugh was warm and genuine. Funny how things work out. As they sat in the garden surrounded by the sounds of children playing and learning, Augustus reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. What had started as a humiliating loss at a poker table had become the most important victory of his life. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Bartholomew had never arranged our marriage? He asked. Sometimes. But then I remember that the best things in life often come disguised as disasters. Octavia smiled up at him. Besides, I prefer our version of events. The millionaire who lost a bet and gained a soul. The librarian who sought revenge and found love. It's better than any fairy tale. Even better than the ones your father used to read to you. Especially better than those. Because this one is real. As the afternoon sun began to set over Millbrook Heights, Augustus Ravencrest held his pregnant wife in the garden dedicated to her father's memory, surrounded by the laughter of children whose futures had been brightened by their shared commitment to justice and redemption. He'd entered marriage as a transaction, viewing Octavia as an obstacle to overcome. He was leaving it as a partnership built on love, trust, and shared purpose. The greatest wealth he'd ever accumulated wasn't measured in dollars or real estate holdings, but in the quiet moments like this one, moments that prove that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to lose everything you thought you wanted. In the distance, the Lysander Penrose Children's Learning Center glowed with warm light, filled with young minds discovering the magic of reading. It was a legacy worth building, a future worth fighting for, and a love worth every sacrifice they'd made to protect it. The story that had begun with a poker game and a forced marriage had become something neither of them could have imagined. A genuine partnership that had transformed two damaged people into something stronger together than they'd ever been apart. And as their child grew within Octavia's womb, carrying the combined legacy of the Penrose intellect and the Ravencrest determination, Augustus knew that their greatest adventure was still ahead of them.